all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Double Feature Podcast, where every week me and my boy David go back and forth watching movies, coming up with great marathon weekends, great back-to-back viewing experiences just for our listeners. David, how are you doing?
I'm feeling pretty good. Love is in the air, and particularly after this episode, we finally got back to some slam bang movies.
Yes, we did. For those who may not have joined us last week we watched some pretty good like musical romance films, backed by the Beatles. And before that we watched kind of bad romantic comedies. But this week, this week, we got some bona fide classics, some of the oldest films we've done on this podcast, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's true. We've never really done more of a classics episode before.
Yeah, I guess the closest we would get to is maybe when we did Mr. Smith Goes to Washington last November, or maybe even Paths of Glory before that, or Paths of
Right,
Glory
yeah.
just recently. But David, why don't you tell the people what we're watching this week, and maybe give them the elevator pitch while you're at it?
Right. So this week we are watching Bringing Up Baby and The Apartment, two certified classics, one by the great Billy Wilder, and then The Apartment, opposite of that, is a little bit lesser known, but a wonderful Jack Lemmon film, and including, too, a great performance by Fred MacMurray. Everybody knows from Double Indemnity. Just excellent picture like I'm from the times. I guess if we want to dive into those log lines, here they are.
Yeah, give us The Apartment, and then you got to tell everybody what we're watching for the other movie.
Oh, I did say I said Bringing Up Baby, Billy Wilder film.
Bringing Up Baby is the Howard Hawks movie. The Apartment's Billy Wilder. Bruh, you've been
I'm all over the place.
You're all over the
I've
place.
been dealing with something, everybody. But yeah, Bringing Up Baby, excellent Howard Hawks film. The Apartment, excellent Billy Wilder film. My brain is in order again.
We did it. Life is restored.
Yeah, so those log lines. Bringing Up Baby. A bumbling paleontologist trips head over heels into the disastrous path of a love-struck gal who needs help transporting a leopard to her aunt, who owes $1 million to the museum he works at. The Apartment. A naive desk jockey deals with the scuffs of being a doormat to all the superiors at his insurance agency, who use his apartment for nefarious play until the executive of the company brings over the elevator.
Now, everyone, these movies are way better than we are about to explain them to you. Because honestly, David, I don't think I'm going out of bounds here saying that The Apartment might be a perfect movie.
Oh, it's pretty close. I mean, I do think there are a couple little things that I find not bad about it, but interesting to point out about how the movie is aged. But overall, I mean, this movie has laughs. It makes you cry. It's full of drama. It's very kind of dark at times. I would even go out to say.
Oh yeah, there's a part in this like comedy that gets real uncomfortable and gets real deep, almost out of nowhere. But it's built up perfectly, and it's great. And then we have Bringing Up Baby, which I'm gonna be honest, the first half of that movie is nothing but just amazing, like timeless jokes. The last half, yeah, gets a little shaky, but that's the thing with comedies. I mean, Howard Hawks should be proud that his comedies aged well over the last 80 years.
Yeah, I mean, probably one of the greatest comedy minds ever to live. Um,
Greatest directors, yeah.
exactly. And what I think is interesting about these two, I guess, before we break into one over the other, is there's almost an interesting thing in that you said how one half of the movie is great, but the other is kind of just succumbs to the whole romantic comedy thing. Whereas the other movie just kind of like keeps the pedal down and goes right into the emotion of the whole situation. Because it could have just as easily done what Bringing Up Baby does,
Hmm.
and keeps it light, keeps it fun, keeps it a romantic comedy. Where The Apartment is like, no, we want to seriously address love and relationships in this contemporary time we live in.
Oh yeah. Also, here's something else because I think we should do a little bit of the backgroundy ish for these kind of movies.
Mm.
So both these movies, I know Bringing a Baby firmly sits in that golden age of Hollywood. Came out in 1938. We're talking old school studio system, which you have Cary Grant, Katharine Hepburn. That's old school like golden age Hollywood. But The Apartment, it came out in 1960. I don't know. Was Golden Age dead then? And were we getting into that
Um,
transition into like not new Hollywood, but we were kind of building up to it because Bonnie and Clyde came out in like '64. I want to say.
yeah, so I feel like this was, and the movie shows it too. It was right before the onset of kind of new Hollywood because, like you said, Bonnie and Clyde probably was the marker of a much more mature, um, explicit type of Hollywood that made excellent films. Uh, and this is kind of beholden to it's interesting because the subject of the movie specifically deals with something that would have definitely gone against the Hays Code.
Oh
Definitely.
yeah.
I mean, like adultery, of course, it would have gone against it, and it's the movie's rife with it and makes fun of it even. Um, on top of the fact that, like we said, some of the darker bits, I mean, those kinds of things are so there. It deals with so many taboos that it's like I feel like it's showing the signs of maturity. You might say this is the time that Hollywood was going through puberty.
Hmm.
Um, but specifically, I wanted to note that this was probably the time that everybody was going through the Red Scare in Hollywood. The late 50s, going into the early 60s, I think was while everybody was not kind of doing the whole
Oh, everybody's a communist. Get out of my business, kind of
yeah,
thing.
and it probably is towards the end of it. I will say I don't know specifically the dates on those things, and I feel like it was probably a little earlier. Um, but yeah, the 50s especially, that's what Hollywood went through, and you might even say was this might be starting to be one of those reaction movies to that type of thing, where we're tired of being told exactly what to do. Let's make a movie about real things.
Oh yeah. Then it's also done by Billy Wilder. I believe Billy Wilder because I'm pretty sure Billy Wilder is German and he fled or yeah, he was sorry, he's Polish and he fled Poland during like, you know, the Nazis. So
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure like he came over, he's a very different outlook on life and he's very much aware of how to make movies under certain regimes that were way stricter than the American movie audience, you know, or the American like movie studios were bearing down on him.
Hmm.
So it's very interesting. I think it's just interesting we should give like a little historical context to these movies because they're so far back that it might be kind of weird when we start talking about some of the jokes in here. So, but yeah, other than that, like let's just talk about the movies in general a little bit.
Yeah. Which one do you want to break into first?
I want to break into The Apartment because I think that movie's amazing, but I don't know because Bringing a Baby I think we get a little bit more shtick out of.
Yeah, that's okay. The first thing I'll ask is, did you watch? Because I watched Bringing Up Baby to the Apartment.
Ooh,
What did you? What order?
I watched Apartment to Bringing a Baby.
Interesting,
Yeah.
because I think that also it says something about the ways we perceive these movies. I actually really enjoyed the sequence that I did because I thought Bringing Up Baby was like a nice little warm up to get in the mood for a romantic story, and then The Apartment just was like, okay, now we're gonna really give you all the good stuff. Um,
Honestly, that's probably the better way to watch it because I watched The
yeah.
Apartment and then when I watched Bringing Up Baby, I felt like I was looking for stuff from the apartment that wasn't in Bringing Up Baby. But if I watch Bringing Up Baby, then it's a little bit more basic and it's a little bit easier to digest than the apartment is. So I think that's probably the better way to do it. Bring Up Baby to the apartment.
Sure, yeah. And, let's talk about that, I guess, because Bringing Up Baby, like I said, really enjoyed from the get-go. And at times was even surprised with it for how kind of far it took some of the comedy.
Mm-hmm.
Not saying that it went like to vulgar places or anything, like something more close to the apartment, or not even to say that the apartment was particularly vulgar, but there were certainly things in there that I was a little bit surprised that in 1939 they got away with. I mean, the shower scene in particular, for example.
Oh yeah, like there's a couple of gags and jokes in here that I thought, because this is the Hays Code, right? This is when we're still under the actual Hays Code and not just Hays adjacent movie stuff.
Prime of it.
Yeah, like I thought the gag where we see Katharine Hepburn's like underwear or whatever when her dress tears.
That too.
I thought that was I thought that was too racy for the Hays Code, but I don't know. The Hays Code is really weird when people talk about it. Like in classes and stuff like that, because it almost sounds like everything in Hollywood was super Puritan for 30 years.
It is kind of interesting because when we go over in those classes, it's often talked about. They give you the packet with all the rules. Most often, it's straight from the code itself. And
I almost forgot. For those of you out there in podcast land, the Hays Code was the original MPAA ratings board for filmmaking way back in the day. Or not the first, but it's one of the earliest ones that basically was all over Hollywood.
And basically, it limited things to. I mean, it wasn't explicitly connected to this, but let's be honest here. What we were looking for in the Hays Code is things for good Christian America. They basically wanted it to be no risque, no violence, no corrupting thoughts. Let's keep everything clean, everybody.
Yeah, if there's a bad guy in the movie, he has to get his comeuppance at the end. And that's one of the reasons why, when we were talking about the Scorsese stuff, the gangster film became very formulaic, is because the gangster always had a rise and fall, and the fall was always him dying at the end of the movie.
Well, it's interesting, too, because some of those gangster films come from before the code was put into place.
Some of them do, yeah.
And I almost feel... Well, I was going to say, almost feels like the code was in reaction to things like those types of movies that did border on glorifying these gangsters' lives for most of the movie. It was probably also in reaction to other things as well, such as there was a quite significant adult film industry in Hollywood before the Hays Code.
Yeah. There was also lots of mainstream movies with a lot of nudity in the silent era.
Yeah,
that's something that people don't think about. Is yeah, guys, when there's no regulation in Hollywood, basically anything that'll get asses in the seats rolls. So there was nudity, drug use, there was basically everything you could put on a screen without sound. That was on a screen to get people into the movie theater to sell tickets.
Yeah, and so right here it says 1934. So if anything, a lot of those original gangster films came before Hays Code.
Yeah.
But talking more about this movie, I guess, in relation to that, is that I don't know. It's one of those things where maybe it also has to do with Billy Wilder and Cary Grant being the main or Katharine Hepburn too. I mean, not to get
for the last time, Howard Hawks directed Bringing Up Baby. Billy Wilder is The Apartment.
Sorry, I mean they're all old white guys,
Yeah,
same.
Katharine Hepburn's a woman. What do you mean old white guy?
I'm not getting her name mixed up with anybody here, but
all right. The original Meryl Streep. Come on now.
Yeah. So Howard Hawks, Cary Grant, and Katharine Hepburn being the players in this that are selling the tickets, I feel like they might get away with a little bit because Cary Grant's a family-looking guy, Katharine Hepburn's a wonderful lady, Howard Hawks is the biggest director in all of Hollywood. So
probably at this time it's him, Frank Capra. Who else is big in 38?
Oh, probably. Would you say Fritz Lang would be one of
Oh well,
the
Fritz Lang
end
probably
of the.
came over by then. Yeah. No, I don't think Fritz Lang came over yet. But I mean, if we're talking like big name Metropolis, like he did M already, like he's probably huge at this point, but he's still in Germany. But I get what you mean. Like here,
Yeah, I guess he doesn't do the big heat until 53. Um,
but I know what you mean. Like Howard Hawks is like S tier director in Hollywood in the 1930s. Like
he's
at this
Steven
point,
Spielberg. You know, really, yeah,
yeah.
that's what's going on here. And so yeah, I don't know. And really, it's like none of the scenes particularly are getting close to anything in particular. And they deal with it in a more tasteful way. And though there was one moment I was particularly, I kind of had a chuckle because this is almost 100 years later when you think about it, watching these movies. And there's that moment when he's in the bathrobe talking to the aunt, and then they're all trying to figure out what is going on with him,
And
he
they're
just
all
bursts out
just
and it's
talking
like,
and
"Well, it's just
talking.
turned gay all of a sudden." And I was like, that line has doublespeak now. That's interesting.
Yep. Uh,
Probably was doublespeak back then, frankly. But I mean,
I think that's one of the first times gay is used in its modern context in film. I saw a thing about that, and that's one of like the first times it's used in its modern context.
interesting.
Yeah. But besides the point. So bring up
Yeah,
baby.
bringing up baby. I mean, what else can you say about it? It's
Well, the thing is it's, I think this is our issue with a lot of comedies is that most comedies don't have a lot of substance to them, and this isn't any different. So I guess we can do this. Put on your art house cap for a second, the big pretentious fedora. What is this movie about, man? What are the themes, man, that are going on here? Maybe that'll give us something to jump on.
yeah.
Because
I mean,
the movie's pretty light at the heart of it, but when you think about it, this is a movie about Katharine Hepburn trying to steal away a man on his like wedding day.
it's kind of funny because one thing I was thinking about. Obviously, the movie is straight romantic comedy.
Yeah.
There's no ifs, ands, or buts. We're not trying to muddle anything. We're just going to make a movie that's going to make you laugh. It's going to give you a little bit of that romance play, and then it'll get you back in your home having a great night, no questions asked. And one thing I particularly noticed while watching it was like big budget. It seemed like they gave this thing a big budget. I don't know. I didn't look it up. I don't know what it would be adjusted for inflation particularly, but in my mind, I'm thinking, first of all, the leopard has to have cost them a lot of money because they use it quite a bit, especially to handle it. And two, I mean, some of the set pieces of the movie. I mean, admittedly, I'm not talking like this movie is a blockbuster with its set pieces, but like when they knock over the Brontosaurus at the end, I'm like, that's probably got to cost a lot of money to set up.
Oh yeah, like there's some weird amount of money going in here, and I do actually have the budget. I have this up here. Okay, so the original budget for this movie was estimated $1 million or $1,073,000. So
that's specific.
yeah, estimated. For inflation, that's about $20 million. This is about a $20 million picture, which is relative to what a romantic comedy would cost now, but
yeah, that's, I guess, not that bad.
yeah, but also I have a point about the leopard because there's a leopard in this movie. They make a point that there's a leopard in this movie. The leopard is the baby in the movie, in the title or whatever. That's the leopard. Why is there a leopard in here? Did somebody dared the screenwriter make a romantic comedy with a leopard in it? I'll give you $20 if it's a hit.
It is interesting because the other thing I'm thinking about, there are scenes when the main actors themselves are standing right next to a fucking leopard.
Yeah.
I mean, I know there was no such protections against them back then that would really make that a liability for the studio. I know they were contracts for these actors, and that most of them were contracted with a particular studio. But I don't think that they're actually like now, where The Rock has like production insurance against his biceps. Um, they didn't quite care in that way so much. And Katharine Hepburn standing next to that leopard, well, it looks like it's about to fucking kill somebody.
Yeah.
That's a risky play. More importantly, how do you direct that scene? I mean, like,
Are you talking about the one where it's in the jail and she's dragging the leopard into the jail?
that too, because actually, I was talking specifically about the one where she's like kind of freaking out. But let's talk about that because that was actually the moment where I'm like, wait a minute, wait. I was looking at the screen trying to figure out, like, okay, is there a handler with like a separate
Like
attachment
leash
on
or
this thing?
whatever?
Because she's basically pulling the leopard toward her. The leopard being resistant is one thing, but what happens when that leopard decides it's hungry?
Dude, this is 1938. Animal rights laws? Fuck that noise. If the leopard goes like Miss Hepburn, the handler's got a shotgun. The leopard's gonna go down. Cause think about it, this is 38, right? The standards by which animal
Yeah.
cruelty laws or all that stuff back then, you gotta imagine like Howard Hawks is probably sitting at the director's chair with like a gun, and he's like, if that leopard comes at me, like you can replace the leopard. I mean, it's probably
Yeah.
hard, but
I mean,
yeah,
I was also particularly thinking that like a live animal would never be handled this way in a movie today, because they got them tugging on the leash and like there's just certain things where it's like roughing up an animal this much would never play, ever,
yeah,
ever. I mean, there were, as recently I know that there was like rumors that horses died on the set of Lord of the Rings and shit, but I feel like now in the year of our Lord 2020, not
2021.
not one animal gets to die on set anymore, which is a good thing. Which is a good
Yeah,
thing, But it's kind of surprising to me. I mean, really, to your point, it's quite surprising,
yeah, and
entertaining, but surprising.
oh no, it's entertaining, and it's one of those things where for the animal lovers out there, they're not really roughing up the animal. Like no one's hitting the
Yeah,
kitty. It's
but
just
they
that they're letting a cat run loose on a movie set,
yeah, and
basically.
dragging it around by the with a rope, and it's like I'm not gonna lie, I'm sitting here. I don't want to piss off the thing that runs like 60 miles an hour and can take down full size animals. It's like, you know,
You don't
playing
want to
with God
piss
there,
off the
people.
animal that wouldn't even sweat your ass in a fight.
No, bro, that thing's. I'm gonna be gone in an instant. Like this, you may as well call this movie 60 seconds because that's how long it's gonna take to digest. I mean, I don't know, but yeah, it is. Aside from the production aspect of having a leopard in a movie, the other interesting thing to your point, which is I know really why you brought it up, is it is quite a random thing to base a movie around. Uh, it does make for a very they play with it very well, I will say, because like the one scene aside from the golf course scene is classic. The dinner scene afterward is classic. But one scene I particularly loved because it was just like I love movies that their style is double speak and kind of like a not a black comedy but like a macabre comedy where they're like it's still lighthearted but they're talking about kind of dark subjects at times.
Yeah.
When he's in the meat shop and trying to order the meat, and they're like, "Oh, do you want it cut this way, this way? What are you gonna do? Are you gonna broil it? Are you gonna roast it?" And he's like, "No, I'm gonna eat it raw." And they're both like, "What?"
Huh? Why?
Uh, yeah. So that I mean, I thought it was funny the way that was tonally done, and then once they get to the house, it does, like you said, it kind of drags because they spend a lot of time at that house too, and I know that makes sense for the movie,
Hmm.
which is a good thing. It never didn't make sense,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, for a Cary Grant, Howard Hawks, Katharine Hepburn movie, you could have taken this on the road a little bit more. Um,
I think that's probably the biggest issue with the movie, right? Because the comedy ages well. It's just the second half drags, right? Like it has a pacing issue.
yeah, I was kind of thinking about both of these if they could be done nowadays as a remake specifically.
Hmm.
Bringing Up Baby obviously is never getting remade. Uh, it's too you can't. It's like there's something classic about it that you just can't repeat. And one reason too why I think it's good that that doesn't happen is the comedy ages well. Specifically, also that it ages well within its own contemporary style.
Hmm.
Because I thought about that golf course scene, and like the joke in it is that she's trying to pull away with the car, right? And
Hmm.
then I mean, aside from the whole the golf ball thing, the parking lot bit when she's trying to pull the way with the car, I feel like nowadays, okay, you have like obviously the stars in it would be one of those NBC stars. You're gonna have like an Ed Helms playing Cary Grant's part. You're gonna
No,
have like
obviously it's Jimmy Fallon and Drew Barrymore.
right.
Obviously.
I do feel like Jimmy Fallon could get away with doing these like kind of more classic looking things.
Really, really light, kind of old school slapsticky kind of comedies.
Yeah, because I feel like that's kind of what his thing really is, rather than trying to be like the leading romantic guy.
Hmm.
But aside from that, it's like it's going to be one of them, and then opposite of them, it's going to be one of those like quirky NBC comedians, like a Kristen Wiig maybe, like a there's another one from the cat. I forget her name off the top of my head, but she was in Yesterday. She was the manager.
Oh yeah. Uh
Like she
I
could be another good part for the opposite. And they're going to be crashing a couple Kia Sorrentos into each other, and it's just not going to go off as well. But specifically, what I love so much about that scene is the image of Cary Grant standing straight up on the run board of the car
mm.
as it's driving away, being still trying to like just say I'll be right back. But like nowadays, I mean, I don't know if anybody's noticed, cars don't have run boards anymore.
It's not a
Uh,
thing.
unless you're in like a Ford F450 and it has like those step stools to actually so you can actually get up into your car.
Well, the other
But
thing is I'm also going to assume that cars nowadays don't just start when you get in them because Katharine Hepburn steals like 5 cars in this movie and she just gets into them and they just start.
yeah, she must have like the master key for all cars in the world because she really does. Or maybe I wouldn't put it past this character to know how to hotwire, but um,
Like that's the real story. What led up to Katharine Hepburn's character in this movie? Because she knows how to like hotwire cars. She knows how to like tame wild animals. She knows how to like all this really weird stuff in the movie that when you think about it in context, you're like, is this woman like secretly like a James Bond? Is she like a high stakes assassin or whatever that just knows how to do all this random stuff?
yeah, and actually, to my point too, I think that's one of the things I really like about this, and why I think it could be done nowadays. Is it almost is like all of this silly shit going on inside the story, with the backdrop of being like everybody's supposed to be so prim and proper and astute, and then that there's just a bunch of crazy things going on.
Mm-hmm.
Almost makes it funnier. Like it is almost funnier to look at these people who have they got the top hat and they're going to dinner and they're going to have a drink at the bar and then have their swan folded plates and everything, and that's normal life. It's almost funny to see that interrupted. Whereas nowadays, I feel like everybody's so casual. Not to say that that's a bad thing. I mean, I'm not trying to say we should go back to the old days of America. What I'm
Well,
trying to say is like
everybody
it
wears a
almost doesn't.
suit.
Yeah, it just doesn't land as hard because it's like, well, it's just not as funny to see a guy on the hood of a car in a t-shirt and stuff than it is to see a guy
In like
with
a in
like
like a
Coke
dress
bottle
suit.
glasses on. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know, and yeah, I guess that's my point. Oh, that's the point I was going to say. Is it's kind of also the reason that Knives Out is funny because all those
Yeah.
prim, proper, rich people having these funny things happen to them is just even better. It's funnier to see some when the divide between the punchline of the joke and the backdrop of the joke are more apart
Hmm.
because then it just makes it's like it widens the chance for the comedy.
Yeah. Yeah, I see what you're getting at. Like the movie is really interesting in how it plays with setting, set up, and then payoff, the punchline of the joke, where a lot of the settings of these jokes, they set up one, like, the situation, then Katharine Hepburn does one thing, Cary Grant reacts to it, and then it's just an escalation of those two, like, really conflicting personalities in a very alien setting just exploding. And it's really funny. Like, their personalities, how they interact with each other, that's what the comedy is. It's a vaudeville act. Which is one of those things that we don't really have anymore. Like, we don't have vaudeville style comedy anymore.
A little bit. I mean, I think that comedy, entertainment, like more generally, but comedy specifically has become so like decentralized that it's harder to find a specific type. And especially, that style of comedy doesn't exist in the most popular mediums anymore. I feel like you could find something like that if you search. But yeah, that is interesting. One final point I guess I want to make about the movie, because I thought there was in a production sense, looking at the movie technically, it was kind of interesting to notice a few things that were like shot a certain way that were shot that way because of the time, whereas nowadays it wouldn't be shot that way. Because both these movies kind of take place. We saw a couple modern or four recently. The last 4 of the month have been modern movies shot in a totally contemporary way. Whereas these kind of are in 2 different eras of filmmaking. And I'll make points about the apartment later, but it's interesting how a lot of times you, as a modern viewer, are like, it's kind of awkward sitting in a 3-person shot for so long, or sitting in a wider group shot for so long that has a weird angle once the camera moves and stays in a place. Specifically, there are 2 shots in the introduction when they're all standing around talking to the museum manager and his fiance and him talking about the bone. They stay in that 3-person shot very long. Like, and yeah, they have cuts to go to close-ups, but it's kind of few. And then it was like, wow, that's kind of interesting that they wouldn't have thought to use less of the 3-person shot.
Yeah, it is weird because this is kind of at the height of, we're going to do everything in a master, and then we'll cut in like 3 close-ups, and then that's the scene. Like, that's like old school studio filmmaking. And that was like the basic standard for like television, for television, for movies, for all that stuff until like the 50s. And it's still used in television today, if like the old like sitcom TV, where everything's done in this big wide master, and then you cut in for like a single or a close-up, and then maybe a 2-shot, and then that's your scene. And your scene's usually comprised of like 3 or 4 different shots, and then that's it. And Bring Up Baby is full of that. Yeah. Mine is, I think it's God, I want to say it's like the final scene of the movie when Katharine Hepburn meets Cary Grant, and he's putting the bone together, and she's on the ladder that's just waving back and forth magically, because balance works like that. And it's just 2 shots. It's it's 3 shots. Big wide of the room, Katharine Hepburn going back and forth, and Cary Grant reacting to Katharine Hepburn almost falling, but not falling. And then that's the whole scene.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting because it does look cartoonish. I give that a pass a little bit more because I feel like nowadays it would also be they'd use like CGI and shit to fill in the gaps, and it wouldn't look as good.
Yeah, there'd probably be like a cutaway to like, oh, the ladder's legs coming off the ground or stuff like that.
I will admit the one thing about that scene is that that ladder looks damn flimsy, and at least I'm sitting there going like, wow, they really got an actor up on that thing.
Yeah. I think that's the thing about these movies is I can't believe they paid an actor to go up on that shit.
Yeah.
Also, how did Cary Grant not dislocate his arm catching Katharine Hepburn as she fell?
I know, because that was the other thing I was surprised by specifically is like, I don't think those are, I mean, the woman's probably a stunt woman, but like, yeah, that guy standing up there, it either is Cary Grant or Cary Grant's brother that just happens to be a stunt person, because they get a full wide shot of him pulling her up from, by the way, a 25-foot drop. It's like,
yeah.
Also, Cary Grant must be strong as hell. I mean, He pulls her up like nothing.
Like one arm just full, like pulls her up and just full stands her. Like that's her whole, that's the whole gimmick. Man works out.
But there was one more shot that I thought was quite awkward in that when they're in the jail and I think it's when the assistant that was supposed to be watching baby comes in.
Mm-hmm.
He comes in and the camera moves from right to left in a pan, but it moves from like a lit part of the set where he's coming in, and then it's like to the left of it, they're all standing behind like prison cell doors and bars and stuff, and it stays in there and it's obstructing the group totally. Like you can't really see through the bars all that well. So part of me sitting there like, what are we going to cut? And it just keeps staying there, and then finally they cut, and it's like, okay. So yeah, I don't know. It's kind of interesting how it seemed like there was less planning that went into some of the cinematography.
Yeah, like, and it's not so, it's not bad, right? The cinematography's not bad. It's just super basic, and but it does feel like some of these shots were come up like, maybe not on the day, but pretty close. And
it's like one thing I think of right now is that all of them are pretty much eye level shots.
Mm-hmm.
And there's not a whole difference in angle or anything. A lot of them panning across the room. It's like, it's simple stuff, and probably exactly what a Howard Hawks movie looks like anyways. I mean, if I look at his filmography again.
Well, I mean, he, like, with Howard Hawks, you get a lot of, like, good stuff coming in with, like, Rio Bravo, that's in 59. He has a lot of great stuff with, like, Westerns and, like, The Big Sleep, that's also very good. He did The Star Is Born in 48. He also was...
so maybe he's not quite who I'm thinking of in that respect. It's
he also did the original Scarface. Like, he has a very wide open career. It's just, I think Bringing Up Baby might have just been his, like, studios give me some money, let's do this.
Yeah, I don't know who else I would be thinking of in that respect, because what the movie that it reminds me of style wise is can't think of the title, but it's about the guy who like gives up his rich life as a film producer to become poor, and he like travels. He makes a trip to like live amongst the people, and he meets some girl while at a diner. Fuck, I can see it in my head, but it reminds me of that.
I gotcha. For those out
I'm gonna
there,
look up. I'm gonna interrupt you in a minute with the title, but so beware. But
it's all good. But yeah, like, Bring Up Baby, it's a good movie. Would recommend. There's a lot of funny to it. The first act, or the first half of the movie, you're gonna really enjoy. You're gonna get a couple of laughs. It's gonna make you smile. Laughed half, it has some pacing issues, but if you push through it, it works out. You're gonna have a fun time. But now, I think that might wrap us up with Bringing Up Baby for now. Unless, David, you have one last point to give, or are we?
No, I'll remember the title of this movie at the break, and that'll probably be it.
That'll be what opens us up from the break right after this.
Dean, I found a great way for us to do something cool and to make a little money on the side.
Great. I've been looking for a new place to put my money. What do you got?
No investment needed. In fact, it's super easy, and there's creation tools we can use to record our podcast right from the phone or computer.
Wait, why would you record a podcast on your phone? You want? No, never mind. Where do I put my money for this?
I don't need any of your money. We can even get our podcast distributed to big streaming platforms like Spotify and Google Podcasts.
Oh, I get it now. We're talking big business here, okay? So you're going to need a lot of money from me. How much money are we talking here?
No, definitely don't need any of your money. In fact, we can make money from the podcast with no minimum listenership.
Okay, now I think I'm getting what you're going at here. We need to spend money to make money, so we're talking some big gains here. Big gains.
No, definitely no. I don't need any of your money. Just all we need to make a podcast right in one place.
Okay. So what you're telling me is that you're gonna need a pretty big check from me for this podcast. So do I just make it out to cash? Because it's no problem for me. I'll just write it up right now.
No. Listen, Dean, just head over to anchor.fm and check it out. You'll see why Anchor is the best place for us to record, edit, and distribute our podcasts. And I definitely do not need any of your money.
Shut up and take my money. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Double Feature podcast. David, what was the name of the movie you were trying to think of?
It's Sullivan's Travels. Very famous movie. Preston Sturges. You can slap me on the wrist later. I don't know.
Well, that's a famous movie, but it is as famous as this movie we're about to talk about, The Apartment.
I think so, actually. Yeah.
Probably, yeah. It's really weird, right? Because, okay, for everyone in movie land, podcasting world, whatever, me and David, we went to, film school. Right, David? We went to film school?
We'd like to think we did.
And we learned about, Bringing Up Baby was brought up in, our film classes. At least in mine, when we were talking about, old school American Hollywood films and comedies and shit like that. I got introduced to Bringing Up Baby. I assume the same was for you, David?
Yeah, of course. It's one of the most talked about ones because, they bring up the mainstays, Howard Hawks, Frank Capra, apparently Preston Sturges, but I don't remember, but
yeah,
definitely one of the pillars.
But no one talks about The Apartment.
Yeah. It might have been brought up briefly because the interesting thing too is that Dean and I had the same film history professor, and Billy Wilder films they do talk about are Some Like It Hot,
Sunset Boulevard.
Yeah, the famous ones. Whereas it's for some reason I know it mostly has to do with the fact that this is later on in Billy Wilder filmography. So that's kind of part of it. And, when you have films like Double Indemnity, The Apartment, Some Like It Hot under your belt, even though, again, I guess now that I think about it, Some Like It Hot only came out a year before.
Yeah. And then we also have, Sabrina, we have The Lost Weekend. He Bad Seed, 7 Year Itch. He did a lot of...
7 Year Itch, the famous Marilyn Monroe hit.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. 7 Year Itch, Some Like It Hot. Those are his Marilyn Monroe films. And those are the Marilyn Monroe films that I think everyone goes to watch. It's like that and Diamond... Is it Diamonds Are... No, it's Gentlemen Prefer Blonde. That's the name of the movie. That's the Diamonds Are the Girl's Best Friend's name of the song. But yeah, those are the Marilyn Monroe movies people go back and look at. And the other thing is The Apartment won 5 Academy Awards.
As it should.
Yeah. And no one talks about it. And I'm not saying no one ever brings up the movie. No, it's disappeared into the ether of history. But it's not in popular culture anymore. I don't hear many movie geeks such as ourselves bringing this up when they talk about Billy Wilder or fun old comedies or fun romantic comedies or even Jack Lemmon films. It's kind of weird, right?
It's kind of interesting because, like we said a little bit in the top of the show, this film deals with a lot of taboos that were probably taboos in 1960, but now, in any other movie, would just be kind of normal love and relationship things that you would talk about. Although, again, this movie is particularly dark or serious at times in the subject matter. I feel like you could totally get away with this film again now. Opposite of that, what I thought of Bringing Up Baby, and almost even that somebody ought to do it again because part of me feels like that we're lacking kind of real serious analyzations of, that every now and again in every generation you get those films that really measure what's the romantic climate of the time. Last decade it was probably something more along the lines of Knocked Up. Or before that, it was probably more along the lines of he just is, or it's that movie. He's just not that into you, or whatever it was.
Not
That's a
500
famous
Days
one.
of Summer, man.
Yeah,
Not Head
that
Over
or that.
Heels,
No,
Fever
not head over
Pitch.
heels.
Yeah,
Uh,
I get what you mean.
yeah, and on backward. In this is certainly, I feel like, would be one of those for the '60s, even though it was kind of before the '60s transformed into something different.
When it transformed into the hippie 60s we think of as the 60s. Because that's what
Yeah,
people kind of forget is the 1960s was like the Twilight Zone, like suits and fedoras and smoking, up until like 66, 65, maybe?
65 probably. Yeah,
Yeah. And I think we should talk about the quote unquote taboo stuff that the apartment deals with.
okay.
Because when we say taboo, we mean taboo for like the 1960s. The biggest one is the adultery stuff that goes on in the apartment. Because no less than 5 named characters in the film are cheating on their wives rather openly, and they're serial adulterers.
Yeah,
And like any, so if this happened in Bringing Up Baby, at the end of the story all these guys would have had to have been like either divorced from their wives or killed or end up in jail for something.
yeah,
And other than that, we also have, there's other very taboo subjects that come up in this. The questioning of like paying for like love comes up. The allusion to prostitution that comes in. There's also a suicide attempt in the film.
and suicide attempts talked about certainly.
Yeah, and all this, and there's even a whole thing of like loneliness and what it means to just like be alone in a city and all these things, and it's wrapped up in this hilarious movie. It's funny, there's a lot of wit involved. There's a bunch of stuff in this movie that's just fantastic. But those are the taboo subjects that this movie brings up. So, trigger warning for people for a 60-year-old movie? 61-year-old movie? There you go. So, David, where do you want to get started?
I mean, okay, the first thing that this movie obviously has going for it is that it has the star Lemon, Jack Lemmon at the helm, and Billy Wilder loves Jack Lemmon. He's was in his big namesake "Some Like It Hot." Uh, what I find interesting about Jack Lemmon, first and foremost,
Mm-hmm.
is that he he's like he's fantastic in the movie. He's perfect for the part, but he's also like kind of traditional is not quite the right word. Maybe like an actor inspired by a bygone era of Hollywood at this point. He seems like an actor that should be existing as the talkies are coming out and has that kind of like joyous personality about him
He
that would
looked.
make him a.
Oh, sorry. Keep going. Keep going.
No, I mean, that was pretty much my point.
He looks
Yeah,
like somebody that should have been famous, with like Abbott and Costello, or like oh god, now I'm gonna forget their names. They're the other two comedy duo. That like wasn't Abbott and Costello.
oh,
They were like right before him.
are you
They,
talking about Bob Hope and
well, I guess yeah, Bob Hope and Ben Crosby, but the other, whatever. I'm gonna get.
oh,
Well,
what's it in them faces? Fats and
yeah, the fat guy
the
and the skinny
fucking.
guy that weren't Abbott and Costello.
I'll do a look up real quick, and you can continue to talk
Oh
about Jack.
yeah, sorry. Yeah, but Jack Lemmon. But I get what you mean. Jack Lemmon's like, it might be how he's portraying the character, because the character in himself is kind of naive, kind of upbeat, and he does feel like an actor of a bygone era, and that might just be because he's an actor in that transition. It's this movie's come out in 1960, and he's doing an acting style of like 1950s, maybe even like 40s comedies. But that acting style is going to be kind of antiquated soon, because we're we're in the era of like Brando, James Dean, I think, had just like passed away around this point. So we're getting that whole method acting, different style of acting that's going to come around rather soon once Bonnie and Clyde comes out. De Niro's going to get big at the end of the decade. Al Pacino's going to come out. Like, we're going to have a whole change of it. But is it just a thing where older comedies, this style of acting just works better for comedies?
Maybe so, because like he fits perfect in something like Some Like It Hot that's technically set a couple decades before.
Mm.
The other thing, oh, by the way, it's Laurel and Hardy who you were
Thank
thinking
you.
of.
Thank you. I was gonna. I knew it was like, I thought it was Harvey, and I was like, no, that's not it. It's something else. Like, it's right on the tip of my tongue. But yeah,
You got it.
cool. So
But
Laurel and
yeah,
Hardy.
I don't know. I mean, whatever it is about him, it's kind of also interesting because it kind of feeds into the theme of the movie a little bit, or not necessarily the theme of the movie itself, but what Billy Wilder is kind of going for with this movie. Because a more traditional looking star like Jack Lemmon, while also on the backdrop of kind of deconstructing a traditional look of Hollywood and look of Hollywood romantic stories, kind of adds to it, because then you kind of see somebody who very much is the face of that style being deconstructed along with it, and Lemon does a fantastic job at going along with that. Well, at times, I will admit, in the second half, or really like the final fourth of the movie, was still a little upbeatish. I would have liked to seen more, maybe go a little further with like the, not necessarily saying be more depressed, but maybe explore those darker emotions a little bit more,
Mhm.
rather than just trying to play gin rummy.
I thought that was cute though. Come on.
It's cute, but it was also a little bit like there was just for just a moment I was sitting there like, damn, you're really trying to tell her she got blitzed while she just killed herself? Like, just give her a break.
Like, bruh, come on. I know you're trying to
Yeah,
take your mind off it, but come on. Uh,
yeah. So I will admit, kind of towards the end, a little puppy doggish, but for most of the aspects of the movie, it's kind of perfect too. Because I mean, the guy who does this, the character specifically, he can't be somebody sad, or else we're gonna get kind of depressed by the situation, like
yeah.
him being a doormat. It has to be somebody that's kind of
Kind of
like he
goofy.
does in the movie, like he's trying to use it to his advantage.
Yeah. It's interesting because his whole motivation is, I'll let these guys use my apartment for their affairs, and they, give it back. I get a promotion, I get a pay bump, I can climb my way up the ladder faster if I just let these guys take advantage of me. And then it like takes that weird turn when he finally gets, the hots for the elevator girl, and then the like one of the greatest reveal scenes in cinema history happens with the broken mirror.
Yeah, because that's interesting. I almost want to do off the record for a moment. I do want to do a video essay on this. I know we have yet to complete ours, but I want to do a video essay on why this movie is perfect for explaining dramatic irony. Because but on the record again, this movie's dramatic irony is absolutely, it's like the most perfect part of the movie. Is that Wilder knew exactly how to. I think we've mentioned it before, but there's a famous Quentin Tarantino quote in which he mentions playing the audience like an orchestra. And I feel like that's what Wilder's trying to do, in that you have to remember you're not just writing what you need the actor to do, what you need the opposite actor to do, and how they react, but you also need to think about how you're going to get the audience to react to something. Because, you know, we as the audience do know at that point what's going on.
Yeah.
You know every piece of information. It's been very third person in that way. And frankly, at this point, it shouldn't surprise us a whole lot. But it's not so much about the surprise of the information, so much as like we've already pulled the pin on the information. Now we're waiting for the emotional grenade to go off once it's revealed to the characters.
Yeah. And
I
it,
think
it
that's
breaks your heart when you see Jack Lemmon's face when he looks into the broken mirror and he realizes that the girl he's been pining for is Oh, that hurt a little bit, right? Like, was that just me?
Yeah, because I think it also puts us in his shoes a little bit for a moment. You know, it's such a it really takes our faces and shoves it into the piss because that's really what's going on with him. Is he's getting a little bit of comeuppance for this thing that he's been okay with up to this point. I mean, he hasn't in the movie. He hasn't been okay with it totally. You know, there's like physical ramifications for why it's annoying to him, but up until this point, he hasn't really realized why it's such a wrong thing to do morally.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I mean, if it isn't like I don't know why it's not so quite there in most of the other scenes, but that whenever they shoot inside that office building, it's just like slam bang some of the shots they make.
Oh, what is it, the opening? The first shot of this where it just looks like just like a mile of nameless desks and people,
Yeah.
and he's just in this sea of typists. That shot is going to be repeated and reused forever.
Oh yeah. It's kind of like when everybody reuses the shot of the cowboy walking out the silhouetted doorway. It's like that kind of shot is going to signify that kind of setting forever. And it almost got me thinking, like, I wonder how they got it to look so huge. Like, part of me was like, okay, you could probably find a space that's big, but then you got to hire so many extras. And
Aha.
while it's Billy Wilder, so I'll finish my theory real quick, and then I see you have the answer.
Hmm.
My
I looked this
theory
up.
is that I'm thinking, okay, you got to hire a bunch of extras. It's a Billy Wilder movie. You could do that, or what you could do if you wanted to save some budget is put a big mirror in the middle of the room so it looks like it repeats downward. But that would be kind of also complicated. So, because then I'm thinking, what's the cost of a big mirror measured against paying some actors for a day? So you tell me the answer now because I'm interested to know.
So, how he did it is the first, like, I think it's the first grouping of like 5 rows of desks are
Hmm.
full size actors, full size desks, and then beyond that, there's smaller desks with children in suits for like 10
Jesus
rows.
Christ.
And then it's smaller desks with like cutouts that are being moved by wires for like the next 10 rows. And then there's just like it's painted backdrop. That's how they did it. And it's
Okay.
fucking amazing. Because you gotta
I
think about it. It's like they just want that forced perspective to make it look huge and insanely big and fast. And he's just in this sea of nameless people. And we're
Yeah,
just
forced perspective is a perfect way to put it. Because another thing I was thinking about when watching that shot, I was like, it looks like they would have to use a long lens just to get it to look that deep, but it doesn't look like they used a long lens on it. It looked like they were still fairly wide because you have the desk and everything in the shot. Like
and
a
everything's
long
in
lens would have
focus
made it
too.
yeah, a long lens would have made it at least shoulder. But yeah, I mean that's impressive. And I mean, you would never be able to do that on an indie shoot, so take it with a grain of salt. But remember, force perspective is a thing.
Yeah.
I like that.
That's one of those things about this movie because there's shots like that in this movie, and I think there's a few other like weird shots that come up in the movie that when you look at it, you're like, okay, that's iconic. I've seen that in like 50 movies.
Yeah.
Because that the opening shot, that's the biggest one I can think of, is when we finally see Jack Lemmon in the desk, and it's that vast sea of desks.
Hmm.
Is there another one that jumps out at you?
Um, I'm trying to think because I can't off the top of my head think of anything.
I mean,
Maybe
granted,
maybe when
they
he goes and sits in the park, but it's not so much iconic. I just feel like I've seen that shot before.
I mean, the other one is like
Um,
maybe the Christmas party, because I don't think there's ever been a more insanely awesome office Christmas party than that is shot in this movie.
they
There,
probably did inspire images of that for more directors.
I just want to talk about the Christmas party real quick because
Yeah, go ahead, go off.
David, I got to ask you a question. This Christmas party, is it the greatest Christmas party of all time? Because there are people just like banging in offices. People are making out in the hallways. There are like the secretaries are doing like king dances on top of like a grand piano that they wheeled in. Like there's
Yeah,
booze a flowing.
I did think that was funny because it kind of looked like the type of dancing that you would have seen in one of those like victory restaurants, where they like only servicemen are allowed in, and it's one of those things where they have the women being like, "Thank you to the troop" during World War II. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
um,
Which is a really weird thing to think that existed.
that was
Where
about 15 years ago during this, which is would make it kind of actually where that would come from, because then I'm sure a lot of those guys went and got with their GI Bill to college, and then they got the office job.
yeah, like you can look at the movie and you could probably peg, which is another thing when you watch old movies like this is probably about half the people in these movies, just in the general scene, they probably served in World War II.
Yeah.
Like that's probably just like factual information. Is about half the people you see in every movie post 1944 or 45, they probably were servicemen in World War II. Like a number of the extras, maybe some of even the women were like nurses or something like that, or they were in the service. Some of the main stars of some of these movies were. I know Jimmy Stewart
I
was in the Air
mean,
Force.
technically, um, I mean, if we're talking about specifically who would, Fred McMurray would have been that. His character, I know he didn't personally serve, I don't think, but especially because Double Indemnity came out 44, so
Yeah,
he's
so
kind
he
of
was
tied up with
enacted.
things. But yeah, that's kind of interesting to think about.
But yeah, but that's whatever. But yeah, so the Office Christmas party just looks like a awesome time.
Certainly.
Yeah, you don't have Office Christmas parties like that anymore. And Billy Wilder actually shot that on the December 23rd. It was an
Perfect
actual.
timing.
It was actually like in a set Christmas party that I think he only had to do like one shot of basically all the party stuff because he was like, I just gave a bunch of the extras real booze and they just went for it.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably the best way to do it is just like, I don't know, let's just shoot a real fucking Christmas party. Why get particular about it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, this is a good segue into one thing that I really love about the movie that you mentioned at the top is I love how much the movie addresses feeling alone in a crowd. Like, not something that you would think would be very talked about, not in a movie setting, I mean, but in like society itself, mental health and particularly that kind of thing were probably more seen as like a weakness back then, kind of
Mm.
thing. And I like that the movie explores those emotions with a little bit more honesty, and it's candid about those things, certainly, because like that Christmas party scene is mainly there so that we can see how emotionally hurt Jack Lemmon and
Shirley MacLaine is.
yeah, Shirley MacLaine, Fran, opposite of him, feel after their meeting in the office.
And when they're actually like in the office, it's so like quiet in there after their like discussion and the reveal. Like it's almost like all the party and the joy just kind of got sucked out of that room. And this movie's great. This movie's fantastic. I love this
Yeah,
movie. This might have just
and you
become
know
one of my
what?
favorite movies.
That's good. I'm glad. And you know what? I think really what I love so much about it is that it all comes down to the fact that none of it's rocket science writing. It's all fairly simple rules to what you need to do. They just take pieces of information that are there from the premise, strong premise, by the way.
Mm.
Um, you start with something simple, conflict wise. What if a guy let a bunch of his coworkers use his apartment as a honeypot? Then you just say, okay, what can happen out of that? He has a girl that he falls in love with at the office who becomes one of the girls that's being taken there. And then you play with the pieces of information that, like,
That just organically spawned from this like concept.
yeah, along with the stakes of his job, the stakes of this girl's, like, how she feels being taken advantage of. This is the movie that I think is why it's most famously taught is because it teaches people how to use props, because of, like you said, the broken mirror and other things that happen throughout it. Um, I did think that it was kind of interesting that Lemon's character's name, which is Cece Baxter. I think it's funny that it's not printed on the medicine bottle for the sleeping pills. Like,
Mhm.
part of me would be like, but your name would be on there. So wouldn't it kind of give her like oh my god, this is Baxter's apartment?
I thought that's what the reveal is when she pulled the medicine bottle out. I thought that's what she was looking at.
Me too. I thought that as well, and then I'm like, oh, well, I guess maybe it was back before they really did that stuff. I don't know.
Well, it's one of
But
those
yeah,
things where that's our modern expectation, and then the reveal of what she actually did with it is just, oh my god! Like she just dunked a bottle of sleeping pills right now, and Jack Lemmon's come home to like discover her near death, and ooh, like it. The movie just spirals, and it's insane, and it's great. Also,
yeah.
it has the most bachelor thing I've ever seen in a movie. David, what is the most bachelor thing you've ever seen in a movie?
Well, you ever strain some pasta with a tennis racket?
That's it right there. We Jack Lemmon is making some pasta and he's like, I got this tennis racket as a pasta strainer. Yeah, that'll work. That's fine. What, you never like made ramen with scissors? Like, come on.
I mean, yeah. I guess it's. I would never. The thing is, I would never think of that because I'm too stupid. It's a mazel tov to him. But yeah, that was a fairly funny bit, and it's actually kind of interesting to bring that up. Maybe it's like a final point. Uh, is the comedy in the movie
Hmm.
goes so far between like the range of it can be so like the tennis racket thing's kind of slapsticky and cute.
Yeah. It's a
Whereas
cutesy
like
prop gag.
yeah, and then some of the comedy too was like very adult like in like the sex stuff and everything. And then also, I'm not gonna lie, most of the time when he's being taken advantage of, or even during the scenes in which they approach a lot of that conflict with the whole him and his boss and everything with a little bit of like deadpan comedy to it that I
Mhm.
love so much.
Oh, I okay. What's your favorite bit? What's your favorite like joke in the movie? Because
That's a
there's a
good
lot of good
question.
ones. Because it
Um,
goes from being like this
oh,
laugh. Oh, what is it? I see it.
not about this movie, but there was one in actually Bringing Up Baby that I love because it just flies under the radar. Um, they say something. It's just a line real quick, and they say we have to get her out of the house, and then Katharine Hepburn replies with, um, or they're in her apartment when the leopard is there at first,
Hmm.
and Cary Grant goes, "You have to get out of this apartment," and then she says, "Well, I can't. I'm in a lease." It's like that was a great one. I
One of
love
those
that.
just like throw out a quick one liner, get the gag in.
Yeah.
Oh, those are good.
But in the apartment specifically, shoot, it's tough to think. Say yours first and circle back to me
Yeah,
because I
I
know I
got you.
have
I
one.
got you. No, funniest bit in the movie starts kind of early. Might be around the one act or the end of the first act mark. It's the phone call. Like he calls up one of his bosses like, "Hey, I need my apartment for the night," and he's like, "Oh, come on, dude. I got this girl. Maybe can you switch me to Thursday?" And he's like, "All right." And he calls then his next boss to try and switch his other boss from Thursday to Friday. And he goes to his other boss to switch his other boss from Friday to Saturday. And it's just this weird like phone call chain. And you just keep thinking, it's like, how many people is he like loaning his apartment to? And he has a schedule book to line up when he can go home. And it's so weird, and I just laugh at it. I laughed out loud watching it when he got to like the second and third one. I just kept laughing. I thought it was so ridiculous. It was great.
And that's kind of an example of that deadpan comedy I'm talking about, where it's not explicitly stated it's a joke,
Hmm.
but the reality of the situation is in itself funny. Which does bring me to the probably the most memorable thing that I remember that I laughed at was when he's playing with the nasal spray, and the boss threatens him, and it squirts across the room. I mean,
Yes.
I think it was just that I like that was so specific.
Mhm. It's a specific prop. It's a specific character thing, and it's just funny.
It's resourceful. I think is really yeah. I like it.
Yeah. Fun fact: that was improvised by Jack Lemmon on set.
Which is precisely what I thought it would be. It seemed like something that a comedian would come up with, and that specifically that the guy would be like, "Oh, wouldn't it be funny if I did this?" Yeah, so cool.
He's good. He's good.
Yeah,
So yeah, You wanna do a final thought on The Apartment before we do our wrap up? Talk about them in context with each other.
Yeah, I guess kind of as I'll do a wrap up and a segue in one, because we said at the top of the show that I thought it was interesting that the different way we sequenced the two kind of gave us different reactions to the movies,
Mm-hmm.
and it kind of goes back to this whole the reason why this probably won so many awards and why Bringing Up Baby is just a popcorn movie for
Mm-hmm.
what a popcorn movie is back then. Um, After discussing it, do you kind of do you would you agree with me that Bringing Up Baby to the Apartment was probably the better? Not I'm not saying that as in there's a competition about this, but I do think that would be the better one to do it because I think you kind of see what the genre is supposed to be, and then what the genre can be if you just take it to another level. And really, like we've seen a couple times on the show, just let your story press down on the gas pedal and let it get all of its juice out.
Honestly, I would agree with that. I would absolutely agree with that. Bringing Up Baby is like this is the standard like romantic comedy plot, really fantasy, really ridiculous. The plot's there just for the gags and you'll get along, it'll be fine. And The Apartment is like this is what you could do with these like very basic concepts in this very specific genre and just see where it takes you cuz it goes places, man. And I do agree. Like I think Bringing Up Baby hits on the gas and just runs its course and just tries to keep pushing and pushing and pushing stuff to get you to get gags out, whereas The Apartment goes all the way down in its story and just pours every feeling you can in that situation out onto the screen and just lets the audience absorb it, and it's very good. I think that's like the perfect way to watch it. Bring Up Baby to The Apartment.
Yeah, and I guess it's like I do have a final point about The Apartment,
Mhm.
in that the ending, you kind of get this moment where she's about to go see what's his face for New Year's, Fred McMurray's character, and they're in the lobby of the hotel. And again, it goes back to why this movie is so great is the whole I got a date, she's standing over there, and then he walks past the date. Somebody like grabs the arm of the girl and they're together and they walk past the
And
camera
yeah,
and then he just goes to the gift card. I mean, that was like a perfect fucking way to visualize the loneliness.
that
But
was that is the exemplification of show don't tell storytelling.
oh, yeah, totally, totally. But that, and then you get the scene at the party where I kind of called it in my head right before Manhattan, but it's played out perfectly. He gets his comeuppance when she just realizes what's going on and leaves the restaurant.
Mm.
Perfect way to do it. The only thing I think I would change about this movie, and it maybe would be a more modern take on it, is instead of her running over the apartment and then the gunshot as like a final, oh no,
And it turns out
and
it's a
then
champagne cork, and
and
yeah,
then they just sit down and play gin rummy, and Jack Lemmon kind of has this,
the
not to disparage it for a final time, but it's kind of like a dummy little smile that he's got going on, and it's kind of
the
like,
the dopey I'm in love with you girl look on his face.
and she's a more contemporary, like 60s looking woman who's a little. I will admit she plays it well in that it looks like she just is kind of like they're both kind of by the end of the when it fades out, it starts to seem like oh they're just being cute with each other,
Yeah,
like they know they're just being funny. It's not actually like he's trying to get a load of this gal. But I feel like you could have played into that emotional bit that the movie keeps going back to, and maybe have like a more of a reconciliation moment where they're kind of outside and it's one of those hugs in the rain or something like this where they're
Y-
glad that they found each other in the city or something. Not so
you
much that they're gonna play gin and
yeah, I know. That's one of those things where at the end of the movie, all I wanted was for those two to like kiss, the big music swell, credits roll. I'm not gonna lie. I was like 14-year-old girl at the end of Titanic. Please let Leo live. Let them live happily ever after. I wanted that so bad in The Apartment.
it's kind of interesting because I remember this moment from As Good as It Gets, which is another kind of classic romantic comedy, obviously from a much later time, but um, I almost want a moment like that where they're on the sidewalk outside trying to figure out if it's going to work, and it's a much different context. But the emotion of the scene where they're both kind of like reconciling with like, listen, I found you, you found me, and that's what I'm most happy about. Which is really, I think, what getting into the semantics of love and relationships. That's really when you start to find like who you should be with is when that moment comes out. But that movie ends perfectly because they just like they decide to go along with it. She's still kind of unsure, but they find like a bagel shop. Spoiler alerts, by the way. They find like a bagel shop that's open at 4 in the morning or 5 or whenever the sun's coming up, and they're like, she's kind of the camera's outside looking in through the window of the bakery, and he's like, kind of shooting the shit with the baker, and she's kind of looking at him like still unsure, but then she kind of realizes it's like, wow, I kind of really like having a guy who just likes talking to the baker. And then it's like it's one of those things where they don't have to explicitly state anything. They don't have to get so on the nose about it. It's
They
just
don't
kind of
have to
one of
get
those
all
things.
weird philosophical what is love thing. It's just
Yeah, it's one of those quiet moments where you realize, yeah, this is a good person to be with, which is, I think, a great way to end those movies.
But yeah. So that's The Apartment. We even got our theory
Fantastic.
crafting in at the end there.
Yeah.
So yeah. So I guess let's do our little wrap up, David. I'm gonna ask you 3 questions for a wrap up here of the movie. So who is gonna watch these movies? Who's the target audience for these 2 flicks?
Us film buffs really is probably who would, but I recommend it to anybody. I mean, um, I feel like these would be good movies to watch if you have somebody in your life who's older, kind of is into these kinds of movies, these older classic types. This would be a good one to sit down and be like, they're classics. I know you'll like them, but I also know they're really good movies. So we can both dig on these because sometimes you watch a classic and it's like kind of
You
the
can
quality isn't as good. And sometimes you watch a good movie, but it's too intense for that kind of audience that is into more of a classic type of film. And I think these movies broach a good balance of those 2 different arenas. And yeah, that's what I would recommend.
All right. Next one. If you could only watch one, which one would you recommend? Maybe people don't got enough time for the full double feature. They can only come in for the second act. What's the one movie they should watch if they can only watch one?
The Apartment.
Oh, that was a quick answer.
Yeah, I mean it's a little dramatic to be a if it wasn't paired with such a sticky comedy, then I might recommend the opposite film because you don't necessarily want to recommend something that can get kind of real with somebody real quick. But
Yeah.
no, I think the comedy or The Apartment is it's a classic and it's really good. It's well crafted and it will impress you.
Honestly, I couldn't agree more. Could not
Yeah.
agree more. And the final question, David,
Hmm.
is the big last one. All right. Does that hat work on Jack Lemon's head? Because he asked the questions like 6 times in the movie. Does the bowler hat work?
It works on Jack Lemmon, but I don't like the hat.
You're like, he could pull it off.
Yeah, he pulls it off. Admittedly, though, it makes him look dorkier. It leans more into the Jack Lemmon dorky thing that he has already going on.
Mm.
It does kind of become a funny thing because I feel like it's his version of noir after a sense. Instead of a fedora, it just becomes like, I'm going to tilt my bowler hat instead. Especially during that hotel lobby moment. But yeah, the hat works on him.
All right.
Mazel tov.
Mazel tov. It's a boy. He became a mensch at the end of the movie.
He did.
He did. That's a point in the movie. That's lines in the movie. So yeah, David, I guess that's the wrap up. What are we going to watch next week? What's going on? Where can people find us? Let's finish it up.
Well, I guess we're ending the romantic comedy month with. I mean, what else what do you do? First, there's love, then there's marriage. Not quite Baby in the Baby Carriage yet. And we're going to be watching a couple movies that have to do with the wedding themselves and kind of being on the outside of that. Bridesmaids, the Judd Apatow film, and then the only other one we really could find.
The one that I remember from late night Comedy Central, TV.
Yeah, it kind of without being somebody who's actually part of the wedding party, but instead is kind of on the peripheral. Tomcats.
Yeah.
Is the film being chose.
I'm here for the deep cuts, the really hard to find, the weird shit. That's why you bring me in.
It's good. Fodder for the worst of episode, right?
Yeah, I am stacking the worst of episodes real quick. But
Kidding.
So I've never seen Bridesmaids. I've seen Tomcats once, maybe twice, many moons ago when I had cable and watched shit on Comedy Central after like midnight. So there you go.
Well, we're in for a treat.
I
think you're really going to like Bridesmaids. I mean, Judd Apatow movies always knock it out of the park, I think.
Yeah. But yeah, other than that, David, what's our YouTube channel so people can find us?
Our YouTube channel's In the Frame. If you want to check us out there, we post this and our other podcast, Too Obscure for TV. And we post those podcasts anywhere you can listen to podcasts as well. Spotify, Google Podcasts, Radio Public, etc. We have an Instagram if you want to keep up with us there. _feature podcast. Is it, Dean?
Double feature _ podcast. Come on.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
But
we're actually going to post things on there soon. Don't worry.
Yeah, we update you with some funny little graphics to remind you that we're out there, and follow us there to keep along with us.
Yep. And everybody, don't worry. You only have one more week of romance films before we break into March. And then we'll stop talking about romance movies during Black History Month.
Oh, we're going to really give you some whiplash in March. Trust me.
Woo.
Once we get there.
It's going to be good.
That's getting ahead of ourselves. We'll see you in the final week of February for our final week of Romance Month next week. Until then, Dean.
David.
You're a mensch now.
Well, I'm a mensch. I didn't. All right. Peace.
See ya.